also due to the fact that we have such a wide variety of speakers, and we have Andrea, who is from Romania and representing AMBASADA. We have Mary Conlon from Ireland, James Bradburn from Italy, Director of Pinacoteca de Brera, and Alice Wu. And I would like to speak now about our panel moderator, Alice Wu, who we had the pleasure to know already for 2 years. She was one of the first supporters of Tardino 6 initiative when she visited Baku in April 2019. We were just 2 months old, and it was our first international event and first workshop that Alice has conducted for Tardino 6 art community, and it was called Navigating the Art Market. And it helped our participants to be more ready to international art market. And we also have this opportunity now to engage Alice to this program of Cultural Accelerator. She was one of the first to agree and support us. And I would like to mention that Alice was raised between the United States and Taiwan, and her art career is very rooted both to New York City, which is on the East Coast, and to San Francisco Bay Area. And currently she's based in Oakland, and she has been working extensively with the grassroots art communities, and she's an artist herself, a fashion designer.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for the lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here. Is my sound all right? Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. So I'm your moderator today, and I am so pleased to be here. I'm grateful to be in conversation with all of you and contribute to our collective knowledge bank. You know, as Ashley said, I had the honor of traveling to Baku, and it's so beautiful by the Caspian Sea, so rich in artistic and cultural heritage. And I met so many of the Azeri emerging artists who are building a foundation for a healthy contemporary art scene. That positive experience in Baku continues to inspire me to keep doing this work to support artists, arts workers, and model how every individual can participate in art and culture experiences to enrich our collective well-being. And like you, I'm so excited to learn what our panelists have to say to us. Our panel experts lead organizations that have proven vital to shaping cultural conversations in their metropolitan areas. Our experts today have global presence, and today we'll hear how they've led their communities through change and transition. So the way that our panel will work today is that I will introduce each panelist with a very brief bio, and then they will give a 5-minute formal presentation to share their work. And then we'll share some specific challenges and solutions that each organization is currently or has recently been facing. Please go ahead and add your comments and questions in the chat. We want to make this panel inclusive and participatory, and we'll work in those questions as the conversation flows. And I also encourage our panelists to respond to your peers with your own questions and comments. So without further delay, let me begin by introducing our first panelist, Mary Conlon. Mary Conlon is with us today from Ireland. She is the founder and artistic director of Ormston House in the city of Limerick. She has curated and produced 70 exhibitions with over 300 artists, ages 8 to 82 from 26 countries. Wow. Mary's experience as artistic director of the Creative Europe project, Memory of Water, spans 6 cities across Europe, and she is an internationally sought after guest curator, advisor, and board member. Mary's writing has been published in a variety of arts journals, and she is currently completing her doctorate in curatorial studies. In addition to her work with artists, communities, and academics, in the past year, she was also elected to the local government's Strategic Policy Committee for Community, Leisure, and Culture. Welcome, Mary. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. And can everybody see that? Okay. Hello, thank you for the lovely introduction and of course the invitation to participate today. As Alice said, my name is Mary Conlon and I am the founder and artistic director of Ormston House. To begin, I would like to state that the type of leadership that I am interested in is context-based and a social process. And I hope this brief introduction to Ormston House will demonstrate this in both useful and practical ways. And I have two bits of advice from artists that I would like to share and that I think about often in the context of today's topic. And the first is, if you have the opportunity to be generous, take it. And the second is, don't wait to be invited to the table, get yourself to the table. So as you see on the screen here, to situate ourselves, Ormston House is a meeting place for the arts in the heart of Limerick City in Ireland. And we're actually located along the central spine of the city. So a group of arts students opened the space under Creative Limerick. And Creative Limerick was a scheme coordinated by the local government's Economic Development Unit in partnership with third level colleges, creative industries and commercial property owners. And this scheme sought to activate vacant commercial property while promoting the work of creative and cultural workers. And here you can find online an explanation document. And this document outlines the key objectives of the scheme and how it worked. And at that time, it was groundbreaking and it had a transformative effect on the city, in particular, encouraging a thriving grassroots art scene, the nighttime economy, and a better quality of life for local residents. However, these impacts were not adequately documented or measured, and from its inception, occupancy was temporary. So the scheme lasted about 5 years, and today Ormston House is the only remaining organisation from that scheme. So the next link I'm going to share with you is our website. So you can find out about our programme, news, and if there are artists attending today, I would like to bring your attention to our free membership scheme for artists there. So in the first years of Ormston House, we used a commercial gallery model as a rapid hands-on learning opportunity for artists and arts workers. So this was starting in 2011, but we gradually shifted to a healthier and more sustainable method of developing artistic projects over time and co-designing the programme with citizens, connecting with local knowledge and expertise. And there were two events that influenced this shift. The first was Limerick was the inaugural National City of Culture in 2014. And the second was Limerick bid for European Capital of Culture in 2016. And while Limerick's bid was not successful, the process was invaluable. And if anybody is interested in learning a little bit more about this online, you can find a social impact report that was led by citizen researchers. And in this, it really points out what worked well, but also what didn't work well of this year and the space for growth and improvement. And I would recommend that you look up this particular citizen research, Denise Chyla, who's now one of the most important artistic voices in Ireland today. And a good friend, and I would recommend you looking up her work. So our programme connects artistic practice and citizen discourse. We host a festival hub, a research and residency programme, multi-year exhibition projects, and community meetings, for example. But it is also a space to hang out, a space to gather and to meet. You don't have to pay for entry, and you don't have to buy something to be there. The Ormston House is perceived as a safe space in the city, and there's a strong sense of ownership by local people. And we've achieved this because we have an open door policy, and we request feedback and ideas and testimonials from artists, from participants, as well as from visitors. We support communities through use of space and other types of cooperation. And we connect our curatorial research with community wisdom. So we have roots in our neighborhood. So as far as our position is, the community is the expert and we listen. So our key partners are obviously our artists and community groups with whom we develop or have developed relationships of trust. And this is really key. And you can actually look on our YouTube channel we have interviews, which I will show you here, with you'll find interviews with members of the community and how they articulate the value of Ormston House from their perspective. So you can watch these very short YouTube clips. So another key partner strategically is Limerick City and County Council. This is our local government. So it is important for a part of our work to feed into the policies of local government and to demonstrate how we are key stakeholders and partners in realizing the aims and objectives. We show how we connect and how we add value to the city and the wider region. And we currently have a memorandum of understanding with the local government, and we will move shortly into a service level agreement. So we report regularly to the local government and in particular to the Limerick Culture and Arts Office, as well as other departments. And in this document here, you can see how we are connecting with the different sectors in Limerick, whether it's tourism, community organisations, business community, the retail sector, the education, in particular third level institutions. And I'm just going to finish on one last note, which I think will be of interest to attendees as well, is I would recommend to look up the Public Participation Network, which facilitates communities to participate in local decision-making and policy development structures. And last year, I was elected to the Strategic Policy Committee, as Alice said, until 2024, representing 139 organisations at local government. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope I haven't gone over my time, but I look forward to hearing the other panelists next. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, Mary. Thank you so much for that. And as a reminder to our audience, these documents are available on Ormston House's website. Is that correct? Thank you. Andreea Iager-Tako connects ideas, people, projects, and communities through social enterprises in her home city of Timișoara, Romania, the country's third largest city and a cultural capital. Andrea co-founded the Play Festival, a radical new kind of experience bringing together music, art, and culture. She also co-founded AMBASADA, a platform for doers of all kinds, housed in converted cultural space. Faber, a capacity building creative hub, and through the experience of working with Creative Europe's cultural and creative spaces and cities, and in time with the pandemic, Andrea's most recent initiative is Building a Community, a hybrid space for creatives and social impact-driven businesses. Andrea, we'd love to hear more about how these grassroots initiatives came to fruition. So I will pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Alice. So good to be with all of you. I'm gonna try to keep it short so that we can enjoy the conversation later. Hope you can see my screen. I'm starting my presentation with the AMBASADA because that's how we met Tardino 6 as well and Asli, and so it's even though it's in the middle of our journey as timeline, it's one of the projects that have shown us how important space is, even though when we started back in 2006, we were a group of young people. We were 19 and 20 at the time, studying in different fields, and it was more about the mission and the drive of creating solutions and alternatives to our community. this took the shape of culture, even though we had medical students, law students. I majored in psychology. So we were a very colorful crowd, and I'm happy to say this diversity is still being kept today when we pass the torch on to younger generation. And it's 100% volunteer-based festival that sparked this wish for us to leave our current jobs and move into the field of social impact. And so we have this mix of one-off events, and we create programs and create frameworks for artists to present their work to different sorts of audiences, and also to bring different sorts of audiences together. And in the same time, we've started and embarked in this long trip of creating sustainable change, taking different forms. But at the base, I think all of the things we have done, even though they were very, let's say, energetic and started from a will of just being doers ourselves and finding solutions, they share all the same values, and they're around people and spaces and quality experiences and quality of life. So with AMBASADA, but also with the additional projects we've done, we do serve this community of doers, but also trying to inspire action within our larger community, and really reach out to people that have at least reached out the stage of identifying issues, into helping them go further to the next stage, and that is building solutions. And we're a fairly small team at the base, but we work with the volunteers and with different teams for each project. So in a way, a sociologist that it's close to us said, in terms of leadership, that we're an adhocracy. Depending on the project, we can each become project manager, and the rest of the team becomes a crew member. And then it's really important for us that we're driven by passion and by intention, and we follow impact. So with these three elements in stake, we've tackled different sorts of spaces and realities and programs. We have Play, who is the initial event, which is 100% volunteer-based. It was the first event that was ticketed after the revolution, and it was kind of a response to all the government's free, low-quality events that would happen in the city center. And we picked a state-owned village museum that was deserted and neglected. Then we have Just TM, who was our way to also build together with the administration, and we've created a free event, but of high quality jazz music event happening in the city center, but bringing for a very diverse type of public music that otherwise would sound like it's very exclusive and it's not for everyone. And so we always say our main target, their main public, is not necessarily the jazz lovers, but it's the people that are crossing the center, going to shops and then stopping to listen to the music. And then we've created a program for Timișoara 2023, European Capital of Culture, which is all about bringing communities in the cultural act, working with artists and building on these neglected spaces, like it was the City Harbor, large-scale productions in which everyone can become a part of the cultural act. And so we've always looked at the neglected spaces that were somehow the commons, whether it was a former brand and an important creative symbol, which we have plenty of. And because of the communist heritage, we have this tendency in Romania of erasing them. but with this sort of action and turning them into, let's say, new real estate projects, we're losing a lot of our identity. So one of our missions with AMBASADA is also to talk and give this stories a longer reach and bring them not only as a respect to the history, but also as a next step, an inspiring step for the future generations. So we used to be in a hat factory, and that was unfortunately demolished. And now we've embarked with Faber in also co-owning the space that we're in. So we're moving a step further into being entrepreneurs and investors. And in terms of action, I would say we've always managed to develop these models that they go into social enterprises, and they have a sustainability model and a business model behind, not necessarily because we love to do business, but because we've done it out of necessity for projects that we wanted to continue and to keep on doing impact. And always, I would say, building on the phrase Mary was using, we've been able, because it's the type of work that it's so valuable, and when it's missing, you feel it's missing, but when it's there, you take it for granted. And in our reality, we always had to prove ourselves, and we always had to build stuff, because before opening this conversation, because it seemed so that it's not possible, that no one would give us credit when it was just at an idea phase. So this is what happened during the pandemic as well. This is building a community, and it's a, as you mentioned, it's a hybrid space. It's refurbished used containers that have become private spaces for social enterprises and creative spaces for artists. And now we have 12 residents that are paying rent for them, and that during the pandemic and the lockdown realized how important local communities are to support their sustainability model. And where today it's so helpful and so motivational, we still need local communities to support what we're doing, and to even find out what we're doing, because this was also an issue. And we've also started upcycling deinstitutionalized adults. We always work very close to NGOs that are dealing with social issues. And this was also our way to contributing to this sad reality that Romania still has, which is around 17,000 adults that are institutionalized. They have grew up in institutions and they stay there because they're either born or they have developed different disabilities. So we also fight for an entrepreneurship environment in which people and every member of the community can contribute with every ability that they have. And so I would say that this mix of the things that we do, because we're not, they're only, we're not architects working with urban regeneration, we're not social workers, we're not artists producing art, but we're all this this mix of important elements. We're in the privileged position where we try to put everything together to make and create a sustainable change. We use empathy, we always follow impact, and we always do it with responsibility. So I would say in terms of resilience and leadership, our model was always to try to identify zones in which we can act, to try to prototype and prove that it's working, with talking with communities, bringing in our conversation as many and as diverse people as possible, involving everyone, really showing a proof of concept, and then slowly working towards building with the state as well. We're not there yet completely, but I think in our culture, just having the conversation opened and us always proving baby steps of how things could be has worked in the past. So that's in a nutshell. And thank you for listening, and looking forward to hearing James and also getting all the questions from our participants.
You really show us how all these different social enterprises place value on each individual, no matter their abilities, and that there are models for sustainable economies. Our next guest today is James. James Bradburn joins us from Milan, Italy, where he has been the Director General of the Pinacoteca di Brera and the Biblioteca Braidense since 2016. James is an Anglo-Canadian whose career as an architect, designer, and museologist spans over 3 decades and across the globe. He has designed World Expo pavilions, science parks, and international art exhibitions, producing exhibitions and organizing research projects and conferences for UNESCO, private foundations, public museums, national governments. He is co-founder of Circles Squared, a nonprofit dedicated to educational innovation and transforming museum management. In fact, under his leadership, James has stewarded several major cultural institutions through enormous structural change, and we look forward to hearing his insights and wisdom today. Please welcome James.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Indeed, the current museum that I'm directing, which is also joined to the National Library, so I'm directing a national museum and a national library. It's the 5th major transformational project I've been involved in. So I'm not going to illustrate any of them. I think that would take a long time. I want to give you a synthesis in 5 minutes of the struggles that have taken over 30 years. So in Russian, you say 5 минут или много или мало. So it's either a little time or a long time. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to basically race through 5 obstacles to change, 5 potential solutions to creating a transformation. And I'll finish with 3 slides about how the museum I currently direct, which, let's be clear here, is not a startup. We are talking Italy's 2nd most important art museum. So it is not going to be relevant to a lot of the work that I know that you're doing in the field, which is equally important. I'm not, actually, it's more relevant for sustainable change than the work I do. But nonetheless, it does represent a certain example, perhaps an interesting example of trying to change a dinosaur. So I'm going to just share my screen now, if I can. Let's see if I can do that. Share screen. I'm sharing my screen, and I will do this. Does that work? Can you see that slide? Okay, here we go. As I said, this is going to be a race. In fact, I'm going to just let me put my timer on so I don't abuse anybody's patience. Here we go. We'll start the stopwatch. So really what we want to do when we're making a change is, first, we want to make it better. I mean, as my PhD advisor once told me, he said, the only reason we do anything is because we want to make it better. We rarely do things to make them worse. The goal we want to create is a learning organization that can change with times. It's got to, because people get older, context change, technology changes, society changes. Any institutional change has to not be creating something new for the present, but creating the possibility of change in the future. It has to be reflective internally, responsive, responsible to its own, to its internal structure as well as external, and it has to be experimental. But it all derives from its mission, because the first thing you have to do is decide what it is that you're about. In fact, that's often one of the most difficult things to do, because really what management is about, the work I do, is just basically you have to assign human resources and financial resources to achieve something. And the something is what matters. Now, the first advice I could give anybody, and I will give anybody wholeheartedly, is read Machiavelli. If you want to understand why people resist change, why people unexplainedly get in your way, don't want to improve things, you just have to look at what lies behind a lot of motivation, which are very unbeautiful things. But if you don't tackle those head on, you're always going to be disappointed when you're trying to make change. So the first part of Machiavelli, which is fundamental, is this idea that the problem with change is the people who are benefiting under the system already don't want to change, and the people who might benefit from change actually can't always imagine what it would look like. So they're always, as Machiavelli says, lukewarm when your opposition is much more consolidated. This is what you have to work with. There's no more true book than Machiavelli's The Prince. The things that internally get in your way are non-alignment, which is to say an organization in which many people have different ideas of what they're doing. Often their ideas of what they're doing conflict with each other. For instance, your financial administration may not share your belief that you should be investing in certain projects. They may not believe that those projects are worthwhile. Non-alignment is a major problem, combined with non-transparency, because those conflicts are often not obvious on the surface. And in fact, in certain cultures, like the English culture, people will lie with a smile on their face and say, oh, everything's fine, and then go back to their office and try to completely undermine what's being done. So you have to watch out for these things. I'm sorry if I'm speaking very honestly about the ugly mechanics of making change, but if you don't understand that those are what you're fighting, change is very difficult because you never know why you're getting set up. Compartmentalisation. Every time you create a division within an organization, you create a boundary over which people have to transfer knowledge or transfer tasks. Every moment of a handoff, if one department or one compartment doesn't communicate, doesn't want to cooperate, it uses those boundaries to resist change. Even when there are boundaries that are not inherently resisting change, what happens is that the handover, people defend what they've done. So there's a resistance to change when people invest in something they've done in the research department and they have to hand it over to the education department. And then the education department says, oh, well, this isn't very good. They change it, which is resisted by the research department. Then they hand it over to the design department who resists their, compartmentalization. The key to getting around this is, of course, teamwork. Risk aversion. There is, especially in the public administration, in public institutions, a belief that you can reduce risk to zero. This is utter nonsense. Risk cannot be avoided. It can only be managed. Inertia. We always did it that way. Why would we change? It's always worked for us. Well, that's true. Going back to Machiavelli, the systems we inherit do work for some people. Some people are privileged. We're looking now at a global challenge to inherited privilege in which all of us, I have to say, in some part, play a role. Everybody in this panel, and I'm probably the worst, have benefited from inherited privilege. It takes great strength to resist your own privilege. The other thing in the public administration that is devastating in the countries in which it works is the idea of a functionary. Fonctionnaire in French, funzionario in Italian. In English, it's a civil servant, which is a much better way of talking about it. But the problem is the assumption is that people are equal and they can be moved. So you have fonctionnaires who are, let's say, musicians, and they could be hired according to a fabulous national competition, and they're all excellent musicians, but they cannot be distributed as if they're equivalent. And this happens all the time. If you distribute your art historians to museums, forgetting that you might be distributing a medievalist to a museum of contemporary art, you're making a mistake. Just as you would make a mistake if you distributed to an orchestra 100 musicians without actually paying attention to what they had to play. The drivers of change are, of course, embracing the notion that everything is a prototype, everything has to be changed, everything is a working proposal that is, the importance is making it visible so it can be open to discussion, debate, and revision. One of my colleagues at Reggio Emilia says, a document is a public place. It's like a piazza. Make it visible. Everybody has the right to say something about it. If you keep it in your own hands, if it's private, if it's kept out of the public sphere, you risk problems of accessibility and problems of dysfunction. So the first thing you have to do, by the way, is you develop, this is going back in the same order as the points of resistance, non-alignment. You have to develop convincing metaphors, convincing ideas, big boats in which everybody can pull an oar, but they all go in the same direction. That is one of the hardest tasks you face, because we all tend to descend to the details and we forget that what counts is the big picture, because your accountant has to share a vision that is shared by the designer, shared by the educator, is shared by the person who fixes your climate control plant. Everybody has to have a sense that they're working for a big picture, a big goal. Happily, in our work, this is easier to do than in most, but it's very important. Don't forget it. Remember that a manager is not a mechanic. You're not replacing wheels in a machine. You're growing things. You're a gardener. Managers, good managers, are gardeners. You have to understand the conditions in which every single plant grows, and they're all different. You have to move them to the place. You discover places where you have any coverage, and you get people who grow best in that situation. Management is gardening. Transversal, inclusive. Remember, a matrix communication responsibility always has to run vertically. Somebody has to hold the can at the end, legally, financially, or whatever. But that doesn't mean that information goes vertically. Information has to be diffused horizontally. Risk, bigger the risk, the more research you do. The bigger the challenge you want to take on, the more you do prototypes, the more you go to your audience, you ask them, ask your users. Don't believe your own bullshit is your fundamental rule of management. Test it and test it. You're going to be wrong some of the time. Listening, fundamental step. Management is listening. It's listening with respect. Respect is at the heart of all good management. It is the thing that is completely ignored by the public sector. In the country, and I work in the public sector, systematically doesn't respect anyone, from directors to cleaning ladies. You have to, if we're going to be agents of change, we have to turn everything upside down. Okay, I just want to give you 3 slides to tell you what we're up to now after the pandemic. And the idea is, in a way, very simple because nothing changes, but very radical because everything changes. First of all, a museum is not defined by its collection. It's not defined by what it has, but what it does with it. And the museum is the community's big house. It's actually all of our stuff that we can't have at home. It's our memories. It's not about tourism. It's not about return. It's not about generating income. It's like a hospital. It's our big house. And like our little house, our own houses are museums. We have precious objects in them. They're hospitals. We get sick in them. They're libraries because we read in them. Our house is just our house. Our institutions are our big collective houses. They belong to the community, and their first responsibility is the community. Post-COVID, we have to change our notion from visiting to use. If it's our big house, you don't visit a house. You use your house. We have to define our participation in our museums as a museum's with us from the time we're born to the time we die. I may need, for different reasons. I may need a museum when I am in grief because somebody close to me died. I may need a museum when I want to learn something. I may need a museum when I need inspiration. A museum has to be there when you need it. 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that we can now do online. We learned during the pandemic, thank goodness, that you can do things online you cannot do in physical presence, just like you can you have Spotify and your iPhone to listen to music. but nothing replaces going to a concert and listening to Chick Corea play live jazz at the Blue Note 2 feet away from you. Nothing substitute. What you have to do is learn what you can only do in a museum, and that's when you go when it's open, and what you can only do online, which you can make available 24/7. That means that you're no longer defined by use, but by visiting, and you're also no longer buying a ticket. You're buying something else. You're buying membership or a participation. So instead of buying an iPhone and becoming a client with clients' rights, you're buying a share in Apple with a shareholders' rights. And that shareholder right is fundamentally, profoundly political. By becoming a shareholder in the museum, by buying a ticket, by buying a tessera, a membership card, like in a library, by the way, you don't buy a ticket to a library, do you? Even free, you go to a library because you're a user. The museum has to adopt a library model. But that means at the end of a year, you can have an assembly of all your users, of all your members. That's legitimate politics. Your members have a right to be listened to. Your clients only have an option of being listened to. You listen to your clients for your reasons. Your community has to be listened to when they're members. Your members have a right to be listened to. And the most radical position, which I'm making currently in the museum, is that at the end of the year, all members of the museum will have the right to be listened to by the board of directors and actually have a voice in making changes to the collections policy, conservation policy. And this, I don't think anybody has ever done, but it's profound because it means that the museum can track the changing demography of the community, which it can't do right now. Museums remain conservative, privileged, bourgeois, middle class, upper middle class institutions, and will do until the community has a real seat at the table, which it gets by becoming a member. There you go.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So much to think about there. James, you really showed us the value of a great visual metaphor, bringing in Machiavelli, the prince. Got to go back and read that. And acknowledging privilege requires both humility and courage. So thank you for sharing with us on all that. What does leadership look like in these times? James, you are steering a very, very big ship. Can you tell us about a time that your values were challenged and how you handled that?
Well, certainly when I first arrived, remember that I came in as one of the foreigners, as the result of Italy's first international competition to have directors of the museums. Normally, a director of a museum in Italy would progress up the ranks. They had to go to the right schools. They went to national competitions. In 2014, there was a revolution, and they fired 20 museum directors, and they immediately rehired them by an international competition. So I was challenged from the outset as a foreigner. I was challenged because I'm not an art historian. I'm an architect by training. I'm a historian by training, and so I was challenged on every front. The key to responding to that was, in fact, to work as a historian and listen to the history of the institution I run, which happily has a very revolutionary history. It had 3 great directors, including the country's first woman director, who herself was, her mentor, who was the director before her, was a Jew. He was fired in 1938. She was imprisoned for helping Jews flee Italy. So and these were people who had been forgotten. So paradoxically, it fell to an Anglo-Canadian to give Italy back the memory of its great museum directors. And that obviously helped me elaborate a vision of Brera, which is also my own vision, which is one of social activism, connection to the community. The first thing I did was to stop doing exhibitions. I said, we don't do exhibitions are a drug that museums use. So we concentrated on the permanent collection. We now have a program called Museum at Your House, where we invite people to basically look at the precious objects they have in their own house. So I had to face the challenges of being considered an outsider by anybody's measure, but paradoxically giving back the museum and the community a history that itself had been forgotten.
Thank you so much. The value of listening is highly regarded by all three of you. Actually, I heard that in different parts of each of your presentations. So I'd love to ask Andrea, what does communication with your stakeholders look like?
I would say it takes different forms, but what this current reality we're all living has taught us that it's also these difficult times where it can be broken and it can be very divided. So what's really important for us is always to use empathy with every stakeholder we're working with. And of course, the ones that are more grassroots are closest to us, but I think it's also interesting to think of the ones that are key and they seem untouchable and that you can't really communicate with them. So our solution was that we always start with an empathy reflection exercise, especially when it comes to authorities, for example, in our case. It's so easily to pass on this bad communication ball to the other, but it's definitely a two-way approach that you need to have. And in our case, what helped us also mentally and in terms of motivation was always to try to understand their reality and try to shape communication and this relationship that is based on listening and passing information, considering all these different realities that we're all living with. So it's a lot of empathy and working with yourself first to adapt and be able to really say you're openly communicating with different stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Mary, my question to you is, how do you build trust with policymakers and funders?
So in terms, first of all, in terms of building trust with funders, I mean, there are specific mechanisms in place. Quite often funding it's public money. So there are usually very rigorous systems in place and to make sure that there's absolute transparency around how money is allocated, how it is spent. There's a reporting, an application procedure. There's usually a very rigorous process of assigning or allocating money and then a reporting process. And for example, Ormston House, while we started as a very, grassroots, informal group of artists, we're now a company limited by guarantee. And this year we're adopting the Charities Governance Code, as it's called, which is actually quite a rigorous and labor-intensive process, but we're absolutely for it because this is public money. So we need to be absolutely transparent with how money is spent. And that's just the bottom line. And also something that we're really keen to show as well, the importance of actually paying artists appropriately and not expecting free labor from any arts workers or artists, which is really important. So I think through over the years, you build up trust, not only through how the use of money, but also the quality of what you're delivering. And if you are in conversation with your communities and working closely with artists, your program will reflect that and will reflect in terms of the engagement. In terms of policymakers, this is an interesting one as well. And I suppose I'll go back to my final point, which was of my brief introduction, which was the Public Participation Network, which is a new nationally rolled out system. So there's one in every county or local authority in the country. And this is specifically set up so that communities can feed into decision-making processes and can make recommendations to to policies as they're being developed or reviewed. So there's a very, very specific way to connect communities, citizens, our elected officials, local politicians or councillors as we call them here, and the civil servants as well. So this is again a way of opening up conversation, and we all want the best for our city. We're all interested in placemaking. We might have different ideas of how to do that or to achieve it, but it opens up a conversation. So I think that for me is how trust is built. I think it's very important within arts and culture that we don't silo ourselves. We're not talking to each other. We need to be going out. As I said at the beginning, get yourself to the table. We need to be talking to our politicians, our elected representatives, to the business community, to, you know, to the wider society, you know, and we have a contribution to make. And actually, I've often heard people saying, oh, it's a different language, or we've different objectives or desires. And actually, in my experience, that's not the case. We all want the best for the places that we live in. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Mary. All that and more. Absolutely. You know, there is a sense of accountability, and person-centered thinking really resonates throughout each of your presentations as well in your responses. Placing communities first and really listening, and the value of that in building communities. We would like to open it up for some more informal dialogue amongst the three of you. Are there questions that you have for one another? James,
Alice, I'd
Andrea,
like to just
Mary?
add one thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to add something to what Mary was saying, which is very, very true. The key, though, I think it's something common to, because this is something I think our attendees might want to understand, is the same values that drive an institution, which are based around listening and attention and respect, actually apply to your funders. Whether your funders are public or private, what you're really doing, you start always not with what you need, but you start with what they want. And that's where, by the way, you discover sometimes you have to walk away from support. If somebody wants something you can't give, rather than try to bend out of shape to give it, you should just say, no, I'm sorry, you're not the right supporter for us. This happens all the time. You have to have the courage to walk away. You go and you say, look, what is it that you see? What brought you here? What is it that you see and you want? And around that discussion, you map what you can do or are doing that corresponds. If there's a value fit, you go ahead. Obviously, transparency, accountability, and trust is built over doing what you said you were going to do. But even before that, you actually have to establish that there is a value fit between the person giving you support, whether that's in kind or in cash. And if there is a value fit that is sustainable, you go ahead. The same observation applies with the visitors to users. You don't want actually partners or supporters that are there like a one-night stand. You don't want one-time funding. You want to develop a partnership. I think we have to move away from models of spot, of one time, because there's no accountability. It works or it doesn't work. People are happy or sad at the end of it. What you want is to build a process whereby, even if it didn't go right the first year or the first phase, you can adjust it. So you're building a relationship based on trust, because you're also listening and responding, saying, well, it didn't really do what it was supposed to do. We spent more here than we should have done. We didn't get, then you say, fine. Let's do phase 2, but let's adjust. So the same principles apply to funders as they apply to your community development.
I agree with that, James. And actually something that I would like to share as well, which wasn't in my introduction, but in terms of building that trust. So as I said, we were quite precarious in terms of our tenancy. As I said, the Creative Limerick initiative, fizzled out, but we remained. And there was a threat in a couple of years ago that we were going to lose our space. And there was actually quite a significant public outcry. We were on the front of the local papers. Our two mayors were debating the value of Ormston House on the local radio, and it generated a really important conversation around the expanded value of arts and culture. And as a result of this, actually, a philanthropic benevolent fund gave us, or rather the local government, 50% of the money to purchase the property, which was matched by the local government. And we actually just earlier this year signed a 30-year lease to secure long-term tenancy for a minimum of 30 years to ensure that there is a cultural resource for the people of Limerick that is not precarious, that there isn't a threat over losing the space. And this is, for me, this is a people power story, because it was that public outcry, and it was the local communities articulating the importance of arts and culture for the city, for quality of life, for their experience, for having a space to meet. And it was really quite moving for the team who worked for the first 7 years on a completely voluntary basis, you know, to hear what it meant to people. It was really very moving. And of course, you know, your funders and your policymakers see this, that, you know, citizens are defending you and saying, this is our space and we want it secured. So that was this was sort of one of the dilemmas that we had recently resolved that I wanted to share. So after 10 years of, you know, precarious tenancy, we now are on a secure footing.
Can we take a moment to go around and see if there's any closing remarks that you would each like to share with the audience? Can we begin with you, Andrea? Final thoughts. Could be a plug, a wish, a question for all of us to walk away with. Yeah.
I also wanted to build on Mary's and James' comment, and is definitely if there was a recipe for success, I would put that in as well, and it's in our case as well as building long-term relationships. And in our case, we have a lot of private support, and then with all the state funding, basically, which is secondary, we actually are trying to make sustainable change and rather influence legislation than getting funds. So this larger community approach and a constant mapping of stakeholders and resources, no matter their shape and form, is really key to long-term impact. And for just my final thoughts would be that it sometimes feels in this domain and in this complex context that we're living in. But I think this exercise of coming together, of sharing openly the goods and the bads, and asking for help, no matter in which corner of the world you're in, are extremely important. And this power of the global community and the work that we each try to do, whether it's small and it's individual and maybe it's not organized, or it's big and it's under a public structure, we need all of this, and we need to use this opportunity of meeting online more to get our fuels going and do the groundwork and be relevant for our communities. So thank you all for today.
My final thought or wrap up that I'd like to share is, so just three very, very quick points. The first is we decided a number of years ago not to have the exhibition program or the learning program or outreach at the center of our activities or our thinking. What's actually at the center of our activities is our team. And in terms of resilience, you really, really need to look after your team, to check in on them. And I also want to stress, in the context of resilience as well, the importance of rest, proper rest. And I refer back to Denise Chila, the artist I mentioned earlier in my brief introduction, who actually advocates this, the importance of this, of resisting that grind culture. It's so easy to do. We care so deeply about what we do and value what we do, but we need to rest. And the final thing that I'd like to share is there was a shared recovery program that Trans-Europe Pals, one of the co-organisers of Cultural Accelerator, organised, which was incredibly valuable. And like Andrea said, a number of these cultural centres actually met online at regular intervals and talked about specific topics in the context of COVID. And at the end of that, there were two things that just came up repeatedly from all of the organisations, large and very small, like ourselves at Ormston House. And it was two things. And one was be kind, and the second was be patient. And that was as much with yourself as with your team, your visitors and participants. So I'll sign off on that little bit of advice.
I guess I'll close. Very good advice, actually. There's little to add, except what I'm even noticing in the way we discuss, and it's often, and I'm saying this very much to people, to the participants, is we are often under pressure to use other people's ideas and other people's metaphors and other people's concepts. In the 80s, we were asked to think of our visitors as clients. We're asked to think of return. We're given measures, and in good faith, we think, well, we better show that we're valuable to the community because we bring in extra income or whatever. I think we have to be very careful about importing the baggage with the metaphors. So the first thing I'd say is defend the way you think about the world, which is linked to my second comment, which is avoid, actually, I would be careful with the notions of success. It's not a state to arrive at, actually. These are not results we're looking for. I would ask organizations and teams, I think the focus actually Mary is putting on the team, stay true to your values: resilience, sustainability, respect, listening to people, empathy. So these will guide you, and everything you do is not a result, but a working prototype that you're going to shape. And when I'm now an old man. I was, like all of us, I was once a young man. Things have changed, and my vision of the world, which I can't avoid having, I have certain ways of doing things. I hope that sometime, very soon, someone is going to sit down and do something different. Don't hold on to what you've done. Accept that these things change over time. Your audience changes over time. Your community changes over time. At some point, you should embrace that. You should just say, okay, well, and as a good gardener, you can watch it grow, but it's about being light and not holding on to things as things, but looking at growth and looking at values. You want good things to grow. You obviously want to resist intolerance, aggression. We have values. Stay true to your moral compass, and everything else derives from that somehow. Finally, I would just, we can all quote Steve Jobs, stay hungry, stay foolish, stay light in your feet. Don't hold on to results. Hold on to how you're building the world that other people are going to grow up in, and build a world in which they can build the world they want to grow up into.
And with that, I wish to give a heartfelt thank you to each of our panelists for spending their time with us today, for sharing their passion and expertise. Andreea Iager-Tako, James Bradburn, and Mary Conlon, thank you so much. Given us a lot to think about because of the work that you do and your dedication to inclusivity and to staying true to your values. And you show us that communities can emerge from challenges with a stronger social fabric. I encourage everyone in the audience to follow these organizations on social media. I hope that you will continue to learn and thrive. So AMBASADA, Pinacoteca de Brera, and the library, Braidense, and Ormston House, all wonderful organizations. And thank you so much for having us today. To our audience, thank you so much also for being with us. Stay in touch And deep gratitude to our organizers, Tardina 6 and Transeuropolis, and our translators. Thank you so much for helping us all to communicate today and putting together this extraordinary program series.